Psalms 133, 1, unity. Psalms 133 exclaims the wonderful experience of God's people living and worshiping together as one. If David was the author, he may have written the psalm to commemorate when all Israel joined together at Hebron to make him king. Jesus gave an exhortation in John 13:34 when he said, "As I have loved you, so you must love one another." He went on to say that everyone should know who God's people are by the way they love each other, and that believers should be identified by the way they live and treat each other. Paul expanded even further upon the idea of unity among believers in Ephesians 4:3. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Unity among believers is clearly important since the psalmists, Jesus and Paul, all thought it to be something worth writing about. Here in Psalms, the psalmist rejoiced about how good and pleasant it is. And it is clear that he was currently experiencing unity with God's people. By the time Jesus and Paul taught the importance of unity in the New Testament, it came in the form of a command. If God's people listen to the exhortations of Paul and Jesus to live in love and unity, then they too will be able to experience the joy that the psalmist experienced and wrote about in Psalms 133. Fulfilling a royal psalm, Psalm 132:10. A covenant-grounded worship centers on the promise of the covenant keeper. The psalmist asked God to remember all that David endured and bring the ark to Jerusalem. Prior to arriving in Jerusalem, the ark had lain in obscurity in Kiriath Jearim for many years. As the king David could afford to live at ease, yet at a significant cost to himself, David desired to be honored by his people. David made a vow to find a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. In 2 Samuel 6, David fulfilled that promise after a difficult journey that included the sudden death of Uzziah. The ark arrived in Jerusalem. When the ark arrived, great celebration ensued. This psalm asked the Lord to remember this in David's favor. The psalmist, perhaps Solomon, asked, "For the sake of your servant David, do not reject your anointed one." This is covenantal language. David's promise to God fills the first half of this psalm. The second half of the text reveals God's promise to David. True to character, God gave much more than even the psalmist asked for. When the Lord makes an oath, he always stands by it. God promised that he would place one of David's descendants on his throne. And if David's sons kept God's covenant and statutes, their sons would reign forever and ever. However, a man from the lineage of David is not sitting on a literal throne in literal Israel today. So, what of this promise from God? Have any of David's sons kept the covenant without fail? Yes. One son of David kept the covenant and is worthy to sit on the throne for all eternity. And right now, at this moment, he rules and reigns. God kept his promise in the person of Jesus. Jesus today sits at the right hand of God the Father, interceding on behalf of his children.